I want to start at the beginning and ask you about the project that you and Brett Easton Ellis were working on before Canyons.
There was a script called Bait, which was a kind of a shark movie that Brett had written, and I was supposed to do in San Juan with Anton Yelchin and Emily Rossum. And it was Spanish money, and the euro went wacky, and the money went south. But the producer was Braxton Pope, and I had to send an email to Brett explaining what had happened with this. And in that email, I said, enough of this, Brett. This is the second film in a row that's gone down because of the new economics. It's now cheap enough to make a movie. Fuck it. You write it. I'll direct it. We'll pay for it ourselves. We won't ask anybody's permission. And we will create cinema for the post-theatrical era. And that was a line I used in that original email. So it was always conceived of as VOD. And that's where the idea of the deserted suburban theaters came from, that idea that this is post-theatrical cinema. This phrase, straight to video, which used to be a derogatory phrase, we're now on the verge of it not being a derogatory phrase, but of it being a genuine method and means of distribution. And the other place those theaters came from, the very first cast read we had, I said to the cast, oh, and by the way, I was so negligent in not acknowledging that Nolan Funk and Tennille Houston are here. Are you still here? Thank you. I said to the cast, this is a story about some 20-something Angelenos who got in line to see a movie. But then the theater closed. But they stayed in line because they had nowhere else to go. And that's how I sort of thought of Brett's script, as these kind of afterlife people wandering around the mall wondering why the cinema's closed, making a movie that they don't really like movies, and hooking up, and they don't really seem to like hooking up much. So that's where the notion of the theaters came from.
Mm-hmm. And it's also, I suppose, you've told the story of the in the interview and film comment with Larry, the remark that was made about the film, that it was cold, which was meant as a derogatory remark, but which is in fact a description of.
This woman who runs South by Southwest did a major breach of etiquette and protocol when she lambasted this film. People who run film festivals simply do not do that. You have to have a condition of privacy and confidence when you submit to a film festival. But the phenomenon of Lindsay is such that it makes normal people do stupid things. Even the New York Times, which changed the title of their article from The Misfits to This is what happens when you hire Lindsay Lohan. So, and even, South by Southwest, they're announcing the films that are in their festival, and they blow their own announcement by taking a swipe at this film, which is not in the festival. It's irresistible. There is something about Lindsay that, makes people get red. It's like the Obama derangement syndrome. They just can't see straight because they have these intensified feelings about her. Anyway, so this woman, head of that festival, makes this crack about the film is cold and dead at the center. And I said to Brett and Braxton, I said, what did she expect? I mean, Brett and I made this film. We damn well know it's cold and dead at the center. That's what it was designed to be. One of the great benefits of just making a film yourself is there is nobody to tell you what to do. If I had made this in a studio kind of way, first of all, they wouldn't have let me cast either Lindsay or James. And secondly, they would have maybe changed the story in some way to make it appear more hopeful or to make the characters appear more sympathetic, And that's not Brett's world. I personally think this film, is more Brett than me. Brett thinks it's more me than him. That's perhaps the definition of a good collaboration.
And then, of course, at the center of it is this, really go-for-broke performance by Lindsay Lohan. And I remember when we were first talking about the movie, you raised the comparison with Anne Margaret and Carnal Knowledge, and I think justifiably. It's that raw.
Yeah, I mean, Lindsay has moved out of her ingenue phase, and she's now in this kind of tough, blousy. She's in the kind of Anne Margaret, Angie Dickinson's, Gina Rowland, and just those tough American girls with those smoky voices. And I think she actually wears this phase of her career quite well. And she, one of the reasons that her makeup is the way it is, and she did her own makeup in this film, and her own wardrobe, and her own transportation, is that she thinks those freckles remind people of the juvenile Lindsay, and she wants to separate herself. And I kept saying to her, but I love those freckles. But she kept trying to cover them up.
Just talk a little bit about the adventure of making the film on your own, making the film on a, what would you call it, no-budget filmmaking, or? Yeah,
I mean, the total investment, Braxton, Brett, and I put $30,000 each. And then Kickstarter gave us $160,000, and everything else was deferred. One of the attractions to doing this, beside working with Brett, was just the curiosity factor. Is it possible to make such a film? Is it possible for me to make a film under this new paradigm? This kind of group cooperative paradigm where everything is driven by social media. The fundraising, we would keep asking for volunteers on Facebook. We asked for extras on Facebook. We got that house, which is really the sixth star of the movie. We got that house through Kickstarter for free. So, everything about this film, from the inception to the casting, to the financing, the making, the promotion, and now the release, is being done in a way unlike I have ever done before.
But what was the experience of making the film? For instance, there was a lot of in-kind stuff with restaurants, with.
Yeah, well, I mean, I told Brett, when he was writing the script, I said, we have to set this in places of people who we know, because we're not going to pay for any locations. And so, okay, we'll set the opening scene at the chateau because they know us. And Phil, who's the manager of the chateau, we gave him a role in the film. He's the computer tech. So we got the chateau for free. That's normally a $25,000 hit. But we had to start working at 2:30 in the morning, and we had to be out by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And that was that opening scene. Other locations are all, people we knew, And it's just like Gus Van Sant. It's just basically calling up people you know. So I asked Willem Dafoe, and he wasn't in town. I asked Michael McKean, and he was laid up with a knee injury, car accident up here in New York. So I turned to Brackett and I said, well, I'm out of friends. Who you got? And he said, well, what do you think of Gus? So, that's how that happened.
How was the energy different for you? The difference between this and working on a set like for a film like American Gigolo or Mishima?
Well, I mean, the fact that no one's looking over your shoulder is a real buzz, because you're basically just, making it up as you go. The only time I had ever had that before was on Mishima, where you realize that you're just alone in this. And, that's a turn on, and also it's kind of intimidating. But, as I said to Brett and Braxton early on, when we were talking about whether to cast James and Lindsay, I said, look, if you can't take a chance with your own money, when in the world can you take a chance? And what's the worst that can happen? The film will fall apart. We lose our money. It's not that much money, Let's just take a chance. And whatever.
Let's take a couple questions from the audience. Yeah. Was Paul's objection to the Times story the headline only, or did he feel that the piece was inaccurate? It's the spirit of the piece that was sort of a drag, right?
I mean, I like the Times story. It was, to our advantage enormously. It got hijacked by the Lindsay phenomenon, but then she tends to do that. The Times was on before she was, in fact. Originally, it was going to be a new paradigm, Brett and Paul make a movie story. And then Lindsay came on, and I said to her, this is going to be great, Linz, because the New York Times is going to be there every day, and they're going to see how conscientious you are. They're going to see you show up on time, that you're a professional, and we will put the end to these stories about your unreliability. Well, unfortunately, the new Lindsay didn't show up. The old one showed up. So now she may have to go through this whole system again and do a film to prove that she is reliable, because people want to hire her. She's enormously talented and she's charismatic. People do want to hire her. It's just the reliability issue. So once Lindsay was involved, the Times cover started to be about the new Lindsay. And then when the new Lindsay didn't show up, it started to be about the old Lindsay. As I said, not even the august New York Times is immune to the hurricane force of this celebrity phenomenon.
It's a question about the recurring theme of pornography in Paul's work, from hardcore through autofocus, somewhat through the Canyons, and what does he find interesting about it?
Well, I mean, to be honest, this film is not about porn. It happens to have it happens to have an adult star as a lead, male lead. But it's about the hookup culture. And the hookup culture is different than pornography. So just because James comes from that world doesn't mean this film is about porn. Autofocus was much more about that, and as was hardcore. Obviously, when you tell stories and make movies, you deal with some very primal stuff. And, sex and violence, kiss, kiss, bang, bang, is as primal as it gets. And so, of course, you're going to start circling around that. What's terribly interesting right now is these kids in this movie. I'm a generation away from Brett. Brett's a generation away from them. These kids are the result of the post-porn generation. These are kids who have been raised in a world of pornography, in a sea of internet pornography. How can that not affect someone's moral ecosystem? I don't know. And so all of our cultural artifacts are now vibing with this notion that we have to raise our children in a sea of pornography.
Yes.
Would it be correct to assume that whatever the challenges were in working with Lindsay Lohan, that the end result justified those challenges, and that at the end you were happy to have taken those risks?
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said repeatedly, I mean, in the film comment piece, I quoted John Huston, who, when he was making The Misfits with Marilyn Monroe, said, I don't know why I put myself through this, and then I go to dailies. And that's the way it is with Lindsay. You say to yourself, why am I, going through all of this? And then you look at the monitor and you say, oh, that's why. That's why. And certain people have the ability to kind of mesmerize us and keep us watching them. Why do we watch Tom Cruise and not another guy who looks like Tom Cruise? I don't know, but we do. Why does Lindsay fascinate us? I don't know. So, I would work with her again in a heartbeat. I think she, if she can get a reputation of reliability, she'll have an enormous career in front of her. She is magic. You can shoot around bad behavior, but you can't shoot around a lack of charisma.
The question, well, it's a two-part, just a remark about something that Pauline Kael said about the brilliance of the script for Taxi Driver when it came out. And then the question is, did Paul have any other scripts or films in mind as a model when he was making the Canyons?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously this is Brett's world. And I like Brett's dialogue. And I didn't touch this script much at all. He had some credibility issues I had to deal with, and I added the thing about the movies. But I like his world. It's not my world. It's really much colder than my world. And as I said to him when we started the process, I said, this can't be that expensive. What you write about is beautiful people doing bad things in nice rooms. That's not really very expensive. We can do this. And so I touched this script less than any script beside the one Harold Pinter wrote, Comfort of Strangers, which I didn't touch at all either, for the very same reason. I like Harold's voice, and I like Brett's voice, and I didn't want to interfere with that voice. So, and then you mentioned Pauline Kael and Taxi Driver. I was a film critic. I was one of her acolytes. Yeah, I was an acolyte, right? Yeah. When I wrote that script, and I sent it to her. And she told me some years later that after she read it, she put it in the closet and closed the door. But then she didn't feel there was enough stuff on it. So she went back in the closet and took a bunch of boxes and clothes and that and stacked them on top of the script so the script wouldn't escape from the closet. And then closed the door again. I thought that was a pretty terrific compliment.
She tried to place you in a magazine or a newspaper as a critic, and you told her that you wanted to go out to find your way as a screenwriter, and you had a breach.
Yeah, I was one of the Paulettes, and my whole goal at that time was to be a film critic. And people would contact her because she had this enormous feeder system of young critics. And she finally called me up and said, there's 2 jobs open. One is in Seattle and one is in Chicago. Now, if you're in Chicago, you're going to be against Roger. I don't think you should go there. But the Seattle job, I think, is perfect for you. And I went to see her here in New York, and she wanted an answer. And I was starting to think maybe I might want to try to write a script. And I said, Pauline, if I do this, I will, I'll never know whether I should have been a filmmaker. And I said, can you give me, this was the day before Christmas. I said, can you give me a week to think about it? And she said, no, I want an answer right now. And I said, well, if you want an answer right now, I guess the answer is no. And there was just silence, and I walked out of the apartment, went back to my hotel, checked out, went to the airport. And on the plane, on the way back, I said, well, I guess that decision is made. And so I tried to become a screenwriter. And I did not speak to her for a number of years.
But then you reconciled.
And then broke up and reconciled
Yeah,
again.
broke up, yeah. Just like the stylistics, yeah. An interesting question about Paul's concept of post-theatrical cinema and what's the next step there? What's it going to look like for him in the next project? But then I guess to enlarge on that question, what do you think that it's going to look like in general?
Yeah, well, the next step is to get rid of IFC. Because we still need IFC, because they are so efficient at bundling and promoting. Larry Clark tried to self-promote a film of his, Marfa, Texas. It did not work. So we still need IFC. If there's another step in the future, you will actually be able to self-distribute. But you can't do it now. You do absolutely need Radius or IFC or one of these people to package for you. The studio system itself, all these dinosaurs and the bread tar pits, I don't know what the studio system is, what it's there for anymore. You know, I mean, at some point, Google and Amazon are going to buy out the studios.
And it's the case that this summer, what Spielberg and Lucas predicted when they gave that press conference has actually happened. There have been 6 enormous failures.
What George and Steve were talking about was just the fact that there was a glut of overexpensive movies. Yeah. They weren't addressing the deeper endemic problem, which is that the audio-visual entertainment is migrating from public space to private space.
Well, what was the first film that Paul ever saw, and how did it influence his work? That happened rather late, right?
I was a product of the Christian Reformed Church, which is a Dutch Calvinist sect in Michigan. And our church forbade theater attendance. The synodical decree, no theater, no smoking, no dancing, no drinking, no rock and roll, stuff. So I didn't see any films as a kid. But I didn't know anybody who did, so I didn't know I was missing anything. But I was sort of getting brainwashed by the Musketeer show. What was that called?
What, the Mickey Mouse show?
Yeah, the Mickey Mouse Club. Yeah. And I was about 16, 17, and this movie was coming out called The Absent-Minded Professor with Fred McMurray. Mm. And they were advertising it on the Mickey Mouse Club. I thought, and so I snuck out. I got to a bus, went downtown in Grand Rapids, snuck up, went to the balcony way in the back so, I couldn't be seen. And I watched this Disney film. Boy, was I disappointed. I thought, well, what's their problem? Why do they hate this? But then about a year later, I was visiting some relatives in Illinois who didn't have as strict a prohibition as we did, and the kids were just sort of sent off to go see a movie in the afternoon. And we all went off, and I saw Wild in the Country with Elvis Presley and Tuesday Weld. And I sat there and said, okay, now I get it. Here's the problem. I see what they're worried about.
It might be interesting to trace the influence of Absent-Minded Professor and Affliction, for instance. Or, that's another discussion, I guess. Are you go- so? Are you going to go down this road again?
If the stars align themselves in such a way that you say, this is the way to go. The next film I'm doing is with Nicolas Cage, and it will be a much more conventional process. But I was exchanging emails today with Spike Lee, and we're talking about this whole concept of Kickstarter, internet financing.
And he's doing a Kickstarter movie again now.
Yeah. He's
yeah.
raising money right now.
Yep.
And the idea of making noise. And I said to him, Spike, you and I should do a film about Clarence Thomas. I'll write, you direct. You know, Clarence Thomas is probably the most complex and interesting black power figure in America today. But if either one of us did it alone, it wouldn't have as much spring to it. So we should do this together. Now, when that starts to come up, and a project starts to have a kind of heat to it, then you say, well, we can crowd finance this too. Yeah. You know, it's not just a normal thing. So it is a kind of case by case. This model is not entirely replicatable for any given film, but the model does in fact work if you can get enough elements together that create critical noise, with audience noise.
Please go home and donate to the Kickstarter campaign for the Clarence Thomas movie tonight. Paul, thank you very much.